All right, it's 6:30, and the Urban Design Commission meeting for July 9th, 2014 is called to order. Can we get a roll call, please?
Mr. Sawhill?
Here.
Mr. Tybor?
Here.
Ms. Sullivan?
Here.
Ms. Emerton?
Here.
Mr. Winchester?
Here.
Ms. Ream?
Here.
Mr. Condon?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a quorum present. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes? We have a motion to approve the minutes from Commissioner Tybor and a second from Commissioner Ream. Is there any discussion or objection? Okay. Minutes are approved. Moving on. Do we have any disclosures for this evening? Commissioner Tybor?
Thank you. I was absent for cases 2014-0062 and 2013-141, which are on the consent agenda as items 1B and 1C, and I'd have to abstain from those.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Sawhill?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. On case on the consent agenda, case 2013-141, I was recused from participating in that and will not participate in the consent agenda item.
Thank you. Commissioner Ream?
Yes, I was not on the commission for, in the matter of the resolutions for approval for case 2013-134, and I will continue to abstain from approving this resolution.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Condon?
Yes, Madam Chair. I was not seated for case 2013-134, so I will abstain from that. And resolution 1B, I was recused from that case, so I will abstain from that also.
Okay, thank you. So with all the people abstaining from the resolutions they need to abstain from, can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda? Just Jerry Winchester is. Okay. We have a motion to approve from Commissioner Sullivan and a second from Commissioner Winchester. Is there any discussion? Okay, consent agenda is approved. So we are now moving on to the regular agenda. I'm going to read the appeal process before we call up the first case. So an individual may have appeal rights relating to any action the Urban Design Commission takes, except Commission recommendations to the Assembly which are not appealable. Appeals must be filed with the Clerk's office within 20 days after approval by the Urban Design Commission of the resolution, which is the Commission's final decision. A fee for the appeal is required at the time of filing. An individual may request written findings from any Commission decision within 7 days. So now we're bringing up case 2014-0098. Do we have a staff presentation?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. It appears that the applicant's design team, Dell HKM, has a presentation describing the project. Staff can say that this project meets the policies of Anchorage 2020 Policy 44, 49, 78, 87, and the project meets all the standards of approval for compatibility with existing and planned land uses surrounding the neighborhood, demand for and availability of public services and facilities, noise, air, water, and other forms of environmental pollution, vehicular and pedestrian traffic circulation and safety, as well as the landscaping standards for feasibility, external impacts generated by the public facility project, the degree of the landscaping elements contributing to on-site use of the public facility project, and visual attractiveness. Now, the high school's dumpster is screened on 3 sides, but there are some dumpsters in the parking lot that aren't visible from abutting rights of way. They're on the sort of the back side of the school, facing the sports fields. Rather than requiring those dumpsters to be screened, the applicant has stated in a supplemental letter signed by the school district, Randy Ribble, who's here today, and they've said that the school district has recently received funding for site improvements on that side of the school, and the intention is to holistically look at that side of the school and deal with potential relocation of the dumpsters at that time. So it doesn't make sense to require them to build something that may be taken down when the project that's before the commission, it wasn't intended to deal with some of these elements anyway, but rather these building additions. The department's recommending concept approval of the request to amend this public facility site plan and landscape plan. They'll come back for final approval, probably pretty quick here, I think. And the department's recommending approval subject to conditions 1 and 2. Condition 1 says consider providing a bike rack near the entrance of the cove, and providing a landscape maintenance plan, including a method of irrigation of new landscaping. That's all that I have. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for staff? Okay. Now we're on to the presentation from the petitioner. If you could please state and spell your name for the record.
Yes, my name is Terry Schoenthal, representing the Anchorage School District. I work for Dowell HKM here in town. And my name is spelled T-E-R-R-Y, last name Schoenthal, S-C-H-O-E-N-T-H-A-L. And with me tonight is Randy Ribble from the Anchorage School District. He is the project manager, and he hopefully can answer any questions I may not be able to if you have them. Also with me tonight is the project designer, Brianne Kiefer, from our office, who will serve as Vanna White, kind of to point to things as we kind of go along here tonight. So anyway, I would also, I think I'll be able to move through fairly quickly, and I'd like to just reserve perhaps a couple minutes to the end for any rebuttal or to deal with questions as they come up. So what we're presenting tonight is the Career Technology, the Career Technology Centers for both West High and for Romig Middle School. Both of these facilities, the West High facility is roughly 27,000 square feet and a little bit of change, and the Romig one is down quite a bit smaller, in the neighborhood of 13,000 square feet. And what these two facilities really provide are go along with the STEM or STEM program that the Anchorage schools have for science and technology education in the schools. They've been tracking and online. They're consistent with all of the planning documents, both from the educational standpoint of the school district, as well as from the master planning that's been going on for both West and Romig. The West High project, the larger one, bumps out from the school toward Minnesota Drive, and the design itself is a lot governed by how that geometry works. The finished floor of the school is quite a bit higher than the adjacent parking lot, and we're going out toward the parking lot. So the site design that goes along with that basically incorporates a plaza area, kind of a very nice stairway entrance, as well as a handicap ramp, because we end up with about a 3 to 4 foot grade difference out toward that parking lot between where existing grade is and where the finished floor of the school is. So along with that, and in part because of this project, we also have to provide emergency access back into the school. So we have met the criteria for the fire department for being able to bring in a large piece of equipment into that area to be able to back it back out. But so as not to have that become simply looking like a road area, it's being put together to look more like a plaza area, because in all honesty, it'll get limited use for emergency purposes, we would hope. And the area also serves as a place where they can pull in a pickup truck, basically, with equipment that may go into that Career Technology Center. So there are a few planters, some landscape improvements, quite a bit of lawn area that goes in with that. And we've been given one condition that we provide a maintenance plan for this, and we will do so with our next submittal. As a result of that, we've also been given a condition about a bike rack near that entrance. We have no issues with that in particular either. All of the plant materials that we're using are very well acclimated to our climate. They're pretty drought resistant, the birches and the Swedish aspen. Once established, they don't require a great deal of maintenance, and as is typical with the Anchorage School District projects, we'll be looking for a 2-year maintenance contract to take care of the plant materials and get it established. On the Romig side of it, it's on the football field side of the school, basically. It's a small bump out that provides new space for these career technology facilities. It kind of goes out into what is now a parking lot that's not striped. There are a few attributes that go along with it. There's a filtering system for a wood shop that's out there, and it's screened also from the football field side. And then some limited landscape improvements that act as service foundation plantings right along adjacent to the school. And I think that pretty much covers. These are relatively minor improvements overall to the school. They have a fair bit of square footage, but when placed in contrast to the bulk of the rest of the school, they're not huge improvements. So they'll be, I think, quite welcome at the school. There's a lot of demand for these educational improvements that are being proposed. So our sense is that we've been to the community council. They've raised a couple of minor concerns, actually more relative to maintenance on the school grounds than any of the designs that we're really proposing here. So with that, I'd like to open to any questions you may have.
Thank you. Commissioner Sullivan.
I just have a fast question. Recently, you presented the improvements for the football stadium, which were adding some grandstands, and there were some issues with parking. How will the whole plan work with parking and with this new addition?
We went through a process actually looking at parking, and overall there's ample parking in looking at the whole school grounds in terms of being able to support these facilities by square footage. At any given time when the football stadium is in use, it's less likely that the school itself is in use. So the overlap, I mean, it's the same way as we go through when we have joint parking agreements, when there are facilities that use the same parking lot and are allowed to because things take place at different times. For the purposes of ordinary day-to-day school use, there's ample parking.
But isn't it that this building, it's supposed to work after hours?
The building will work some after hours, but fundamentally it's a day-use building. Perhaps, Randy, you could speak to that just a bit?
And if you could please state and spell your name for the record.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Name is Randy Ribble, R-A-N-D-Y first, R-I-B-B as in boy, L-E for the last. And Terry is correct. Primarily, it's going to be used for classroom spaces throughout the day. The West High edition, which is the one out in the front of the school, is envisioned to be used as, could be used for after-hour trainings, but we envision that to be more during the summer when school is out of session, to be used by community and or business partnerships within the school. I believe some of that could also occur during the school year, but for the most part, to answer your concerns about the parking, some of the site improvements in the future will address that, and I believe the district's currently working with the MOA for a joint use agreement with the Dempsey Ice Rink next door. So when there is a large event at the football stadium, they would have a shared parking. So we're trying to work through those issues. But scheduled events that will be limited to, 4 to 10 events during primarily the fall and late spring when they have track and field events. So it's not like it's going to be rented out and envisioned for large events outside the school district's use.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Condon?
Yes. In looking at the site plan that you've provided, I see what looks like a lot of vegetation on the existing site that you're going to fill with the ROMIG addition. And policy number 50 in the comprehensive plan calls for the retention of healthy, mature trees. I'm wondering how you're going to, I'm not exactly clear on what kind of trees and plantings are being obliterated by this building, and is this going to be compensated for in another location? I see in the site plan, the proposed site plan, that there is an area, it looks like, to the west that has some planting.
There is an area to the west. We will be taking out some trees associated with this, and I understand the idea of trying to retain plantings where you can. I would suggest that in a case like this, where very careful study was put to where the best location on the school for connecting purposes for other classrooms and for everything else, I would just suggest that in a case like this, that placement of that classroom to best suit the school needs probably takes priority over retention of existing vegetation where we can, or where it exists, but that we do try to replace it. If you were to look in the back of that school now, I think you'd find that there's not a lot that's out there in actuality.
There's not a lot of what?
Of vegetation that's out in the area specifically. The bump out from the school actually fills a bit of a gap in the school itself.
Okay. The other issue I have with the ROMIG design, there is an area that is designated as a yard. And in the rendering, you show this yard in back of a fence. And directly above the yard is this somewhat massive mechanical room. I'm wondering, is that yard, what happens in the yard, and why isn't the mechanical unit that sort of looms over the top of this design, why is that not embedded in the yard, unless the yard is truly functional?
I'll do my best to try to explain. You're looking at site plan and not understanding how the building actually operates. The yard I think you're showing is meant to be a construction yard for the applied technology classroom, so it's going to have places where it's going to store materials and allow them to do building of structures such as sheds and stuff like that, and the screening is met in the area in that area is to prevent that. The reason the mechanical house that you're seeing in the site plan bumps out is the current configuration of ROMIC as it connects to the IMC structure that actually connects ROMIC to the West High building, that it's really the library and counseling area. The mechanical room ventilation is on that wall that's getting infilled. So to provide ventilation or bringing air in to make that work, keep that building functioning, they're coming through a storage room and up through the roof. So what we have on the sidewall to bring ventilation to our existing mechanical space now had to go up on the new addition, and it wouldn't even work in the yard because the yard's farther out in there. So again, that's explaining the existing condition in the building and the reasoning that the designers are bumping up the second floor panel.
Okay, now I understand. So the yard is actually functional beyond just being some kind of dead outdoor space.
Correct. It is meant to, when they have a construction space that can't fit in the school, for the applied technology, which is, it does multiple things, but you can envision a larger wood shop type environment. So when you want to build a shed or some type of thing that you can't build inside the school, it's meant to store and house that during the class time on there.
Okay. Just one more comment for staff. I would say that policy 75 also supports this project if you want to, include that. So that's all I have.
Commissioner Winchester.
Good evening. Couple of questions related to the parking situation. Are there any parking spaces being eliminated by these? I noticed that the one at West is obviously in the yard. Are they eliminating parking on that Romig one or not? It seemed to me it looked like you might be eliminating some parking there.
I think the Romig one actually ends up being something of a wash. Bree may be able to. You need to introduce yourself, too.
Okay. And state and spell.
Yeah, my name is Brianne Kiefer, BRIANNEKEIFER. So we will be eliminating 10 spaces at Romig.
Okay.
But as Terry was saying before, that doesn't compromise the parking needs of the school.
Right. And so the follow-up question to that is, are you increasing staff at these schools? Are these just basically existing staff positions that are going to move into these teachers? I mean, in other words, I'm sort of just looking for some explanation that, okay, we have enough parking and we're not really increasing a lot of staff for these spaces.
Well, there's no increase of staff envisioned for these spaces right now. They'll be taught by the existing staff. It is envisioned when these classrooms are built, the current relocatables that are required to support both the West and Romig campus as they currently are serving the education purposes will eventually be able to be moved off campus because we're adding, I believe, 12 additional spaces at West and 3 at Romig that don't currently exist. So I believe we're freeing up space to get rid of our relocatables on the site eventually.
Perfect. Just wanted to kind of clarify that for myself and everyone. Let's see, what was my other question? Oh, as far as it looked like it's about 8 or 9 trees that you're pulling out on that one side in order to make room for that, and you're also demolishing that one piece of the building. Is that correct? On the west side, is there a piece of building there that's being demolished?
Yeah. The existing cove wing is being demolished.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I wanted to clarify. It looked like there was a piece of building being demolished, but that's the majority of the space where you're putting the new CTE addition. I understand. And it does look like from your rendering that you are adding what appears to be several fairly large and mature trees in the front and around, sort of replacing what you're taking out with the driveway then?
I can probably speak to that, but we are adding new birch trees on the west side of it at least.
Okay, perfect.
So,
yeah, just wanted to clarify because it looked like you were adding about what you were taking out, because I looked.
There's a large spruce tree that's out there that we've kind of gone out of our way to try to keep in the project as well,
okay.
Just because it's so significant and there's an ability to preserve that if we can. So
perfect. That's kind of the effort we'd like to see. Thank you.
Commissioner Tybor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question was actually pretty close to Commissioner Winchester's, and I was trying to get an idea of what sort of impact this would have on the use of the facility overall. And you're anticipating there's not going to be any change to the enrollment there, just the students, the staff, everyone's going to just basically shift into this new facility from relocatables?
That's largely the intent. It's just much nicer facilities, much better facilities that support that career training technology is the bottom line of it. I think the question relative to how many parking spaces are available or how many we add, by code, that's really based on the square footage of the school or by the size of assembly spaces within the school. And by either measure, we have more than enough parking to accommodate the expansion. As Mr. Ribble has pointed out, right now there's no expectation for expanded staffing, but that's really not the governing policy with regard to how much parking is required. The addition of the square footage that's out there, roughly 35,000, 37,000 square feet, is the parking requirement that goes along with that is roughly based on a numerical division into that amount.
Okay, thank you.
Have any additional questions? Thank you.
You're welcome.
So the matter rests with the commission. Can I get a positive motion? We have a first from Commissioner Winchester. Can I get a second? And it's seconded by Commissioner Tybor. Commissioner Winchester, would you care to speak to your motion? Or would you care to speak to your motion? State your motion.
Madam Chair, I intend to support the motion to approve. I really found that the explanations in terms of what's being transpired there in terms of the landscaping and the parking and other issues is well thought out. It's great to see these kinds of additions to these older schools in Anchorage. I know the several other schools have gotten the same type of addition, so I really appreciate the work that's gone in to make that happen for West and Romick. And I can speak to the findings if you want, or we want to do it later. Next. I'll wait.
Commissioner Tybor, would you care to speak to your second?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also intend to support the motion. I believe that the petitioners complied with the requirements of Title 21 and the applicable portions of the Anchorage 2020 policies. I also I think it's going to be a very good project. It's always good to move students from relocatables into real structures when you can, and I like the fact the addition of enhancing the kind of the vocational education technology, I think is going to be definitely needed in the community in the coming years, and it's good to have that addition. So I'm going to support the motion.
Thank you. So we have a motion to approve case 201400098. Now we can do any additional discussion or findings. And Commissioner Sahil?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also intend to support the motion. I would agree with the analysis of staff that the standards have been met. I also just wanted to clarify that the motion to approve was subject to the staff recommended conditions on page 4. And have that part of the record. And with that, I intend to support. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So I'm going to restate the motion one more time. So we have a motion to approve case 201400098, subject to conditions on page 4, conditions 1 and 2 on page 4 of the packet. Commissioner Winchester, would you like to speak to your findings?
Yes, Madam Chair. This project described as a two-story addition and a single at West High and a single-story addition at Romick High are associated with basically new improvements for the continuing education program at those two schools. Further, these meet the policies. Proposed building additions are designed for long-term use. I think that the yard setbacks meet the requirements, maximum lot coverage meet the requirements. The remaining situation items also meet all the requirements. The refuse collection issue and the garbage issue is addressed in the letter that states that they will be removing the refuge to a new location and screening it properly. It's compatible with existing planned uses. These additions are relatively small, as we've seen, and they provide these career learning opportunities for the students. Schools are already served by public facilities, utilities, and they may increase the capacity of the schools, but at this time we've heard that there won't be any increase, and the same number of students will be there, and we'll be moving them in from relocatables. I think that the landscape elements that are provided and the way that they've shown that they're going to add and both delete and add landscaping is going to be viable. The same number of parking spaces are being added and provided. The attractiveness of the landscaping is also well documented in the documents that we've received. Subject to the two conditions and the letter that states regarding the garbage dumpster situation, believe that this project should be approved.
Thank you. Do we have any additional discussion? Do we have any objection? Okay. This motion passes. So this will open the public hearing portion of our meeting this evening. So at this time, I'm going to read the procedures for which you can speak at the Urban Design Commission during a public hearing. So the procedure by which the public may speak to the Urban Design Commission at its meeting is, after staff presentation is completed on public hearing items, the chair will ask for public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow time limits established in the Urban Design Commission Rules of Procedure. Petitioners, including his or her representatives, get 10 minutes. Rebuttal by the petitioners may be allowed when time has been reserved. Representatives of groups such as community councils, PTAs, etc. will receive 5 minutes, and individuals will receive 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the Commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the Commission. An individual may have appeal rights relating to any action the Urban Design Commission takes, except Commission recommendations to the Assembly, which are not appealable. Appeals must be filed with the Clerk's Office within 20 days after the approval of the Urban Design Commission of the resolution, which is the Commission's final decision. A fee for the appeal is required at the time of filing. An individual may request written findings from any Commission decision within 7 days. So at this time, we will be hearing case 20140089. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, we do, Madam Chair. I want to start out by saying that this is a design variance, and it's the first one before the Commission under the new Title 21. And I also want to say that the process for a variance is different from what the Commission usually sees, which is site plan reviews. So variances, in this case, there are 7 standards for the variance, and all 7 standards have to be met before the variance request can be approved. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through each of the standards, and it's a bit more of a laborious process than the staff presentations we normally give, because variances are different. It's a different animal entirely from site plan reviews. So I'm going to go through each of the standards and then say whether it's met or not met. And then follow up to that, when the Commission, when you make your findings, you'll also have to mention each of the standards and whether or not it meets the code. And so typically what we do, and this is at ZEBA, Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals, and they typically hear the variances. And the process is a commissioner will say, just as an example for you all, that I agree with staff's analysis for standards A, B, and C or met or not met, and I don't agree with 4, 5, and 6. And then for each of those, you need to state in your findings. You can either use staff or you can have your own comments, but you have to make some findings. And we would like to have more than 1 or 2 of the commissioners make findings for the variance. Okay, with that I'll start. Oh, I also want to say that laid on the table tonight were supplemental comments, and the origin of those were the petitioner's representative, Dal, had asked Holly Sporth Torres with the Parks and Recreation Department to submit these comments. So that's where that comes from. The petition site is developed with a 2-story office building and parking lot, which are slated for demolition. The use of the new building will be for business, professional offices, and a healthcare facility. The applicant is seeking a parking reduction for the proposed new building. 172 parking spaces are required. The applicant is proposing to provide 150 parking spaces, which is 22 spaces fewer than required. The request for a variance from AMC 210709-0F3 is to allow a parking facility to comprise more than 50% of the area between the street property line and the street-facing building elevation. Under the new Title 21, new developments with parking reductions and alternatives must meet all the site qualifying site development standards of AMC 2107-090-F3. One of the design standards states parking facility location for buildings constructed after January 1st, 2014. Parking facilities, including driveways, shall comprise no more than 50% of the area between the street property line and the street-facing building elevation. And well, that part doesn't really pertain, it's for residential. The proposed site design does not meet the standard, as the majority of the parking is located between the South Street property line and the building elevation. The new Title 21 design standards were conceived and approved in order to improve the design quality of new developments. For the first standard under findings, first one is A. Oh, I do want to point out that I got the numbering wrong. On page 8, if you look at the top of page 8, in italics it says the variance is granted. The variance, if granted, will not adversely affect the use of adjacent property as permitted under this code. That should have a letter D next to it. And then E, if you look at the bottom of the page, it goes from E to G. That accounts for that. A of the finding, this is the first of the 7 standards. The proposed alternative achieves the intent of the subject design standard to the same or better degree than the subject standard. The standard is not met. I go on to say on pages 5 and 6, on A, B, C, D, and E, why it does or does not. The only one the Commission will be concerned with tonight is number C, or letter C. The standard is not met and is the subject of the variance, and that is the parking facility location. The proposal has to meet all of these, but the only one the Commission will be concerned with is letter C. The others will be determined for compliance during the building and permitting process. The intent of the subject standard is to provide safe and convenient access to the buildings for those visitors who don't arrive by automobile and to create a more walkable environment. The applicant states that they deviated from this due to the east-west access and utility easement through the site and the sensitive nature of the proposed use of the building. The alternative design does not achieve the intent of the subject standard because it requires bus riders and pedestrians and bicyclists coming from the street network to cross drive aisles to reach the building and lines the street frontage with parking. The applicant even notes that the building will be used for meetings involving staff from other buildings on the ANMC campus who would walk to this building. Creating a walkable campus is a goal of South Central Foundation as stated on page 6 of the application. Granting the variance would work against the creation of a walkable campus. B, which is the second standard, the proposed alternative achieves the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan to the same or better degree than the subject standard. This standard is not substantially met. The site is within a major employment center as shown on the land use policy map in the 2020 comprehensive plan. The proposal does not meet the 2020 comp plan for policy number 23 and policy number 49. It does meet policy number 88. C, the proposed alternative results in benefits to the community that are equivalent or better than compliance with the subject standard. This standard is not substantially met. The standard is that parking facilities, including driveways, shall comprise no more than 50% of the area between the street property line and the street-facing building elevation. This intent to not have the majority of the parking between the street and the building has long been a goal of new development and redevelopment as it occurs in both the 2020 comp plan and the new Title 21. The proposed alternative does not meet the standard or provide an equivalent alternative or better. The lot can accommodate a building without encroaching into the easement and could be designed with most of the building in the rear. The current development of the lot consists of a building on the south side of the site with parking to the west and north of the building. And there's an attached photo that shows the existing building and the parking around it. D, the variance, if granted, will not adversely affect the use of adjacent property as permitted under this code. This standard is met. The granting of the variance request will not adversely affect the use of adjacent property. E, the variance, if granted, does not change the character of the zoning district where the property is located, is in keeping with the intent of the code, and does not permit a use not otherwise permitted in the district in which the property lies. This standard is not substantially met. The petitioner's narrative on page 3 states that the prevailing building location pattern of the buildings directly adjacent to the east and west are both located immediately adjacent to University Lake Park. The attached aerial photograph of the building site and surrounding area shows the existing building on the site located adjacent to Tudor Center Drive with the majority of parking to the rear of the building. Likewise, buildings to the east and the two buildings directly across the street from the subject site are also positioned close to the road with the parking in the rear. The only development in the area that has the parking in the front is the building to the west. Thus, the proposal will change the character of the zoning district as the prevailing pattern for this area has the parking located either to the side of the building, the rear, or evenly distributed around the building. And there's an attached aerial photograph that shows the parking configurations in relation to the buildings in that area. E, persons with disabilities are provided with access as required by the Americans with Disabilities Act and reasonable accommodation. This standard is met. The narrative indicates that ADA requirements will be met. G, the variance, if granted, does not adversely affect the health, safety, and welfare of the people of the municipality. The standard is not substantially met. As noted above, the 2020 Comprehensive Plan, Policy 23, is meant to create pedestrian-friendly environments in major employment centers, and the requirement to limit the amount of parking in front of the buildings in the new Title 21 is meant to achieve the same goal, which is to encourage and provide convenient pedestrian access to the building without compelling users to walk through a parking lot. The applicant states that South Central Foundation has a goal to create a walkable campus and that staff from other buildings in the area will be walking to this building for meetings. Placing most of the parking between the street and the building entrance continues the car-dominant appearance of the site and moves in the opposite direction from the directives of the Comprehensive Plan and the new Title 21. The parameters of site design include the placement of buildings on the site, the location of primary entrances, landscaping provided along the front of the property, and the location of parking. This approach is fundamental to good urban design as it governs the relationship between private investment on private land and the public's investment in the public realm. As Anchorage continues to develop and redevelop, a more urban and pedestrian-friendly approach to site design is desired for the UMed district, consistent with the movement towards multimodal transportation solutions. The department recommendation: as all 7 standards for granting a variance are not substantially met, the department recommends denial of the variance from AMC 21-07090 F3 in the RO Residential Office District to allow a parking facility to comprise more than 50% of the area between the street property line and the street-facing building elevation. If at the conclusion of the public hearing, the Commission finds that all standards are substantially met and approves the variance request, the Department provides the following conditions for the Commission's recommendations, and those are listed on page 10 of the staff packet, and there are 3. That's all I have.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for staff? Commissioner Winchester?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, my buttons don't work, so I have to raise my hand. The question I have is, it appears to me, just sort of looking at this from the onset, and we'll listen to the petitioner in a minute, is that the largest issue is this 50% parking, and which side of this easement the building is supposed to be on. Is that, am I?
The issue is the parking, more than 50% of it being at the front of the building.
Right.
Yes.
And that's pretty much the predominant issue, is
yes.
it not? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't because there's lots of not met this, not met that, but that's our primary thing. Once you decide on that particular issue, you kind of go whichever way you go.
Right. The issue is that they are requesting a parking reduction, and in order to get the parking reductions, there are 5 standards that you need to meet, right. One of them being the parking in the front of the building.
Understood. Thank you.
Any additional questions? Okay. At this point, we open the public hearing part of the proceedings this evening. So if the petitioner could please come forward and state your name and spell it for the record.
Good evening. My name is Tim Potter with Dow HKM, TIMPOTTER. With me tonight is Tanya Hickok, also with Dow. We have Spark Design here, and we also have South Central Foundation personnel available to answer any specific programming questions or architectural building programming issues. I'd like to reserve 3 minutes for rebuttal, and I'm here representing South Central Foundation. To start off, I just want to say that one size fits all. I want you to consider that that's not true when it comes to underwear. It's not true when it comes to bras. It's not true when it comes to hats, and in my opinion, professional opinion, I don't think that's true for site designs and or buildings and building design. Specific nature of the use of the building, the potential users of the buildings or the proposed users of the building, as well as all the site and the specifics about the relationship with the surrounding properties, all contain specific design parameters that need to be worked through to come to a balance to the best design. And that will really be the basic premise of my presentation tonight. That in fact, I do not believe that the fabric of our urban environment will decay and crater if we leave more than 50% of the parking in front of this building. When you look at the context of where this property is, what the use of the building is being proposed to be, and in context with the overall Native Medical Center campus itself. You can see on the photos where the property is, and Tanya can point that out, that there's a lot of cars all around there. And although it's not highlighted in your packet on page 41, what we did submit was a highlighted drawing that shows where the trails are and where the sidewalks are leading from Tudor Center Drive to the property. And they do not go through the parking, they go adjacent to the perimeter of the parking lot and still provide great access. And we're a little bit interesting here because South Central Foundation can dictate what people do and what the employees do on their campus. They can't smoke, and it's promoted as a walking campus. And when you go from meeting to meeting, you take a shuttle that's provided or you walk. And that's just the way it is, summer and winter. In looking at this property, this building will be housing the Family Wellness Warriors Initiative program, and it will also be the house and home of NUCA Healthcare, and which is a new launching program through the Native Medical Center, through the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium and South Central Foundation, who operate jointly the medical center, is that it is a whole life facility and believes that it's not just those things that may ail your body, but is also those things that ail your head, and brings those together and looks at your entire being as being healthy. This site really expresses itself with some advantages for these types of programs where people are being counseled for either emotional, behavioral issues or whole health. And there was a very specific decision made by South Central Foundation that to be able to have the space that's programmed for the building to be abutted the regional park, University Lake Park, with the park scenery out there and the green that will stay, was very beneficial to their health care program proposed specifically for this facility. So it's not just this rule of 50% of the parking has to be not in front of the building. We're looking at what the users and what the use of the building will be, and meshing that with the benefit of the site itself and those surrounding properties, while trying to not have an impact on the surrounding properties. Close proximity of the park is hugely beneficial, and I'll try and summarize. On the photos, to the north of the property, obviously, is the regional park that we all call University Lake Park. And in that, there is a dashed line on both drawings of this site, and it shows the Chester Creek Trail connector. And over a decade ago, that trail was envisioned to be the filling of the missing link between the Chester Creek Trail system and the Campbell Creek Trail system. And in all the environmental documentation and design criteria for that trail was that it was to serve as a commuter trail linking the Chester Creek Trail system and Campbell Creek Trail system for access to and from and through the UMed district. And there are a ton of people that use this, not just for recreation, but for commuting through and to and from the university district. And having the building proximate to that is very important. Part of the discussion with the park superintendent, Holly Spot-Torres, today, and the reason that she sent the letter, is that the line along University Lake Park is pretty interesting when you look at how buildings and parking interrelates. Some of the first buildings that were built towards the west end of the campus, a one-story high building and a 2 or 3 story high building, have parking in back of those buildings. And they have had continuous security issues, which has required increased patrols of security on the overall medical campus to go there. They had an early experiment when the dog park was first announced and opened, and they allowed people, the general public, to park in those parking lots. It became an uncontrolled nightmare for the operations, both from a snow removal standpoint and security. They have ongoing issues with security, and one of the concerns that South Central has is not just the added security patrol requirements, but then the requirements and issues they have for staff being on the back side, the north side of the building, between the green belt and an active trail and that. The other issue is if you're a user of that trail, and I don't know how many of you are, When you're going through that area, the CDC building to the west and the daycare center to the east both also abut up next to the park and kind of are the bookends for this proposed project. So that we would be matching those projects as far as relationship to the park. And in that far corner, which is the southeast corner of University Lake Park, you're pretty much away from things. And the issue is, you know, what effect do we have in the public realm of the park? And a secure building that provides eyes on the park and that relationship is seen to be a much better approach than having an uncontrolled parking lot adjacent to the park where people can go and hang out and potentially cause problems to the trail users, the general public. Was that my 7 minutes?
That was your 7.
I'll try and wrap up and just hold 2 minutes for rebuttal. So there is a storm drain that goes through east-west, the middle of the property, and it is, as Mr. Sawhill will understand, it is at absolute minimum grade. And if you alter it by 10 feet in length by trying to move it around, it can't get the flow downstream to the pipe. So that's a given on the site. And we've got the park to the north, and we have a couple of bus stops. We've got a commuter trail to the north, and those things all go into this. So the proposed design really tried to do benefits to the public realm by providing that security to the park. It also tries to take and integrate its program to the benefit of those users inside the building and the people attending those programs. And I think that's, you know, that's what we should be doing when you do a design. Take into account those specific site-specific items on your site or adjacent to your site that are beneficial to not just the building or the structure. And that we, you know, in closing, I hope that you will support our approach tonight. And in summary, I don't believe that this causes an absolute collapse of our urban design and fabric, and it does blend in and fit in and is not detrimental to the public health, as staff has indicated, and looks at the specifics of this use, this structure, and the adjacent property. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for the petitioner? Commissioner Sullivan?
I think it's, I understand very well, like, all what you're trying to do. I think where the building is sitting, it's definitely more secure for the park. I think with policy 49, site plan layout and building design for new development should consider the character of adjacent development. I think aligning the building in the back, there's 2 buildings that I can see. West, east, they are just very close to the trail. One has a parking in the front, one has a parking in the side. I see that when it comes to the trail, yes, I'm convinced that it's better for the building to be there, that it's good for the therapy and for the use of the building. What I'm not very clear is how are we meeting, I know the 50% and 50%, probably you are out of room to create all the parking that you need. But once I'm driving in the street, I see that there's a big buffer between the parking and the street. And once I get to your side, the buffer is getting very thin. I see that you have a big island in the middle. So I'm wondering, you guys did explore at least giving more buffer between the street and the parking? I just don't see how we meeting the character of the street.
And I guess that's where I would you know, first I question the appropriateness of making every building in town in the future be close to the street in a general form. And I'll give you an example that's very easy to think about, and that is heading southbound on C Street. And if you are at Benson and continuing south, next time you're driving it, or think in your mind what you'd see now, that you've got buildings that are set back on the east side and you've got buildings right up to the street on the right side. And I don't believe that the buildings directly up to the sidewalk on the west side of C Street make it a more attractive environment for the pedestrians and or those of us that are in our cars driving down C Street. But the east side of the street by North Rim and Siri and the Calais buildings, where they have some parking adjacent to the building in front, look pretty nice. And it's a much better feeling environment to me. So I would caution that, you know, when we have a hard, fast rule that this is the case, it creates a situation where everybody's just going to do designs that respond to that specific guideline of the code, and we start ignoring all the other things that really represent good design. And I think that's a huge mistake. And in this case specifically, I think that we have a strong argument that we are not doing anything to detract from the goal, and that this parking lot is lost within the fabric of the Native Medical Center, and it does not become a huge barricade or blockade or area that is not attractive from the street or keeps people from walking to the building.
But I believe that as you are driving through the neighbors, there's a lot of trees and there's a huge buffer. And what I see in your design, it's not at all as much buffer as the other buildings have between the parking and the street. It's really nice when you're driving and you see all these trees. It feels nice. And I imagine that if you're walking there, it will also feel nice. Yeah. So I'm just wondering,
part of the reason that there's the island of landscaping in the middle of the parking lot going east-west is to break up the scale and the size of the parking lot and provide the interior parking lot landscaping. Now, if we had different rules, you could take all that landscaping and push it up next to Tudor Center Drive, and that would maybe create that buffer line that you're talking about. But really what you'll see when you go by, because of the depth and the width of that landscaping buffer, is that you're going to see half of that parking lot. And that's it. And that will be buffered from the street as well. So you have to start looking at the scale. Look to the south and look at the scale of the parking lot by the Native Medical Center Hospital itself. And a lot of the folks that will be coming to this building will be coming out of the east entrance to that facility and coming, and they have to walk a long ways through that parking lot. Now, the Native Medical Center, the hospital, might meet the requirements of the building being close to the street on the south side where they have a drop-off in their main entry, but they have a huge parking lot, which to me is not what we're really looking for in the fabric of this town. But looking at the scale of what we're talking about on the other side and the ability to get rid of and reduce our parking requirement by 22 spaces is a beneficial thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Winchester?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that. I'm looking at an aerial photograph, and I'm sort of looking as you drive in on the main driveway here. I can't remember the name of it anyway. It's not Diplomacy. And the buildings on the right, there's some with parking in front, and obviously some not. And by the way, I was in one of those office buildings for about 4 years back there. And we did have the same problem you mentioned about the derelicts and stuff in the parking lot behind. We were right in the building on the corner. But the landscaping that's along the street on the right side or the east side, it appears that you're going to be matching that fairly closely. Is that the case with the level of trees and things that you're doing on the road? Mm-hmm. So you're not significantly less or more landscaping as you drive in there. Based on what I'm looking at here, there are a few trees and shrubs along the right side and a few on the left. Some of the buildings are up close. But that level of landscaping is similar to what you show on the south side?
Yes.
Okay. And so then you're augmenting that, of course, with the interior landscaping, which, I mean, it looks like you've got about 7 or 8 trees and some shrubs in the middle. That could be even further increased if you wanted to possibly make an even larger barrier to the building. I think one of the things that it looks to me like design-wise, you're looking to at least provide some ability to see that the building's there through the landscaping on the back side. So those were the two questions I had, is it similar landscaping? And is this, I mean, is there any problem with increasing the amount of landscaping on that interior island?
Not at all.
If for some reason wanted to do a little bit more there, that looks like, okay. I really like the idea that this is setting back, of course, like you said, you're talking about the type of use, and this seems to be a commitment on the part of South Central Foundation, this facility, to a very long-term program. Is that correct? I mean, this isn't...
Absolutely, and in fact, you may be aware that the Family Wellness Warriors Initiative is actually currently located over on Lark Street by Piper, just south of Tudor Road. And there was a large home that was there originally on a fairly large site that was acquired initially, and then several apartment houses were purchased. And it was developed as both their training center, their therapy center, and their office. And when we went to the community to expand the facility, there was an outcry that it was getting too big for the neighborhood. And on that basis, South Central Foundation, in response to the community, said, you know, at the suggestion of the neighbors, why don't you put it on campus? Whether that's the right thing to do or not, that is what South Central Foundation decided to do. And then that coordinated very well with this new NUCA full health care program of body, soul, and that. So, you know, that was an integral part of the decision to come over here. So basically taking that project out of the neighborhood and moving it to the campus, as had been requested by the community. And as far as visibility to the building, I know that you've done a variety of native projects around the state that, you know, the circle is a very important component. And that's really why you see this very strong visual of the circle near the entry of the building. That has both exterior meaning and interior meaning. And so this does have a cultural reflection, just like the Native Medical Center does, with its round parts of the building.
Thank you. And one more follow-up question. As you mentioned earlier, it appears to me that this is a very unique site opportunity with the University Park here. I would just kind of ask, is this is a unique in terms of, we don't find this very often, that you have the opportunity to avail yourself of a huge municipal park on your, you know, the borders virtually your whole back property line. In other words, you wouldn't necessarily ask for this variance if you were in a standard lot with an alley down the back and another building on the other side. Is that?
No, and we could have recreated that feel here, but we do not believe that's the right thing to do for the campus or this facility. And yes, it is the oddity anymore to be able to find a location and be able to have the ability to locate the building directly out, you know, next to the park. And it is a large-scale regional park, and it does have a commuter trail in it. It's got a variety of other trails, so not only is that good for the employees that work here and the staff that will be walking or riding their bike even from off campus to work on a daily basis, but it's also very good because for some of the therapy sessions, they can actually go out into the park and have that sensitive connection to nature, which is so important to that culture.
Thank you. There's a parking lot I noticed across the south, to the south side. It was a very huge parking lot for ANMC, and it doesn't have any interior landscaping at all. I mean, it obviously was done sometime in the past. So it seems to me that you, in terms of what's happening in this particular area, this is a pretty substantial improvement to what we might see across the street.
It is. I can tell you long-term, the plans for that area, as the campus had continued to mature, I believe that you'll see, in addition to the Native Medical Center to the east, and a pedestrian and driving corridor, and then a parking garage that will then have a pedestrian connection either below grade and above grade or both, and a drop-off area, and that will become a fairly significant entry into that facility. So you'll be seeing changes over there as well. So.
A huge commitment to pedestrian traffic in the area. I think we're not seeing the end of that commitment in this particular area, from what I know, South Central.
The fact that it is a walking campus can be qualified that we did pedestrian counts as part of a traffic impact analysis for some of the other changes that we're proposing within the campus. And it has some of the highest, if not the highest, ever counted in Anchorage pedestrian usage in an area like this. And so people are walking, they're making it across the existing parking lots, they're making it across the existing streets. An additional 100 feet, if it's even that, I don't believe breaks the back of this entire facility. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Condon?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm trying to follow the logic of the eyes on the park, making it more secure. So we're putting more eyes on the park, which means less eyes on the street. So does that mean the street is less secure?
No, it does not. The street area and parking out in front is clearly visible. In talking to South Central Foundation's security officers today, they do routine loops through the parking lots and through the major road systems. And then when they have to take additional loops in behind the buildings that have parking next to the park right now. But it is fully visible from the street at this time. And they would likely not have to actually drive into the parking lot to make sure that they had that area covered. But there will be offices and spaces where people are looking out windows both towards the park and to the south, to the parking lot, and to the street. So there won't be any reduction. There's going to be a north side of a building no matter what you put there, even if it's a circle, and they're not going to be looking towards the street. So there will be no reduction in that safety factor.
Okay, so we have two buildings already on location that are directly adjacent to the park and the Chester Creek Trail, but yet there's still this illicit activity that's happening in the park. I mean, can we have any kind of firm evidence that shows that having a building in that location reduces the crime that happens in the park?
I don't know that I can give you an exact number or a figure. I can tell you an observation even as of today, that if you went to the northwest corner of this site next to the intersection of the Chester Creek Trail and the trail connection that South Central Foundation constructed coming from the Chester Creek Trail up to Tudor Center Drive, that there is an old sleeping bag, a variety of clothes, some plastic gloves, assorted other paraphernalia mixed amongst the grass and the gravel at the corner of that lot, which is as far away from any of the streets and adjacent buildings that you can get to. And yes, talking to the security people today, transient activity within the park is still alive and well. If you read in the newspaper about the Mini Cooper that had very expensive wheels and tires that the owner came out during the day, that happened in the big parking lot that we were talking about. So yes, there's...
So we still have illicit activity
we
happening
still have
in
illicit
the park,
activity.
regardless of whether a building is adjacent to the park or not, okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you know, moving on to this issue of the character of the neighborhood, and, you know, parking seems to have been sort of foregrounded by staff and the 50%. I would like to say that a large part of the character of that location for me is the Chester Creek Trail that has wooded park area on one side. And I would like to submit that these green belts, these kinds of park environments from, Central Park in New York to any of these urban parks are a way to mitigate the urban context, the urban environment, to provide relief from that urban context. And by crowding a building right next to that sort of non-urban character of the park is an infringement on the public as users of this space.
I would argue and differ with that opinion in this case. I don't know how much you use that trail, but when I use that trail an awful lot, I actually feel more comfortable and better about the buildings that are closest to it than when I'm out where there are cars visible. And to me, to have a non-park related parking lot directly adjacent to a regional park and a very active use trail is not conducive to the park. I mean, if what we're trying to do, we're trying to hide the cars from the road out front, so now we're putting them and hiding them next to the park. To me, that makes no sense from either standpoint. I think the public loses in that case, and everybody loses, because now we don't get the benefit of having this very specific use in this building for these very important programs to be adjacent to the park. They meet their required setbacks and all that. I understand exactly what you're saying.
Well, what I'm seeing is there's an opportunity by having the parking in the back. We have what might be considered a transient, low-rise development that would lead to your three-story structure that would be conceivably placed closer to the road in conformance with Title 21. So, sort of moving along with, the benefits of your project to your clients, I can completely understand the therapeutic quality of, having your building right next to the park. And, I understand that for the private sector, for this private user of the facility, it's a great benefit. But my feeling is that the public that wants some relief from an urban environment is going to be compromised by placing the building directly on an open green space. Okay, that being said, I would just like to, my final point is that in Title 21, it says, you had mentioned problems with drainage and, on page 2 of your narrative, existing utilities, relocation, cost and feasibility were determined to be non-attainable. Well, if we go to Title 21, Section 2103.240A, it says variances that it is not intended that variances be granted merely to remove inconveniences or financial burdens. So, foregrounded in your narrative is this idea that it's going to be, a major cost to somehow place your building, to somehow deal with the easement and the utilities. But that is not a legitimate excuse according to Title 21.
Not justification for the variance necessarily, but to indicate that there is just not a grand open site that you can plot buildings on however you think you may want to show that you can get 50% of the parking not in front of the building. There are limitations, just like topography and everything else. This is a storm drain that is a public line that's in a municipal easement, a dedicated easement on a plat, and it is constructed previously at a minimal grade And if it's moved and made any longer, then it does not meet the city's requirements and design criteria. So it is a limiting factor that you have to deal with on that site. That's the issue. Yeah.
Well, not having the survey and all this data, I'm sure it is going to be expensive to fix, but I'm sure it's fixable.
Well, I'd rather not have a lift system for a storm drain system, quite frankly. And that I think it is a relevant issue, and it's an issue that I would take into account anytime I'm looking at designing a site. You look for those things that are positives and negatives, and then have your design reflect that and take that into account. And are we afraid of spending money? South Central Foundation's not afraid of spending money. They spend a lot of money on that campus, and they've developed a lot of new buildings. They're doing a 180-unit residential facility and a parking garage further to the west that's under construction right now that will directly abut the park, albeit it doesn't have 50% of the parking in front of the building because they've got like a 4 or 5 story parking structure. And that may not be an imposition to the park because it meets your criteria and the code's criteria, but it is. But they are spending a ton of money trying to do a lot of work on a fairly limited sized campus. And I'm just telling you that the storm drain system is an issue because if you cannot physically do it without a lift station to modify that. That's just a design reality. It's a physical issue. Can it be solved by throwing money at it? It can.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sawhill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I got a couple of points and then a couple of questions. I guess I would agree with you. Our new code isn't everything I want it to be, and there's some things in it that I would disagree with, but we're here to review the code we've got for the standards we have.
And that's why they have variances.
Exactly. And I also want to concentrate on the 7 standards that we have to find that you meet.
Mm-hmm.
And first thing is, I understand you would like to stay next to the park. That's one of the decisions you made when you were analyzing the site and sited the building. Could you move the building to the front? Would it fit?
Can we physically take that building as currently programmed? You could move the building, but then the relationships as far as the entries to the building and that would be different. And you'd probably have to flip and mirror. The circular part of the building has to stay on the west side from an access standpoint and a relationship of how the building functions. So you have not unlimited ability to flip the building around and shove it on that site. Could you physically fit it and stay outside of the setback for the property line along Tudor Center Drive and the side lot lines, the common driveway, and the easement for the storm drain? With a shoehorn, it will physically fit.
Did you look at rotating the building 90 degrees and then pulling it towards the street?
We looked at rotating the building 90 degrees, but it is so long that it crosses over that storm drain. So.
I did note in your plans that your plans call for reconstruction of the storm drain system, removal of the existing storm drain, and reconstruction. So that already appears to be in your program, those costs. And I guess with the information I have, I'm not convinced that it can't be relayed and still meet the grade issues. So I'm not finding that a compelling argument. I'm also not finding that you would prefer not to relocate the water line to be a compelling argument. I think both of those things are something that could be done. I think the real issue here is you would like a parking reduction, and our code is very clear on what you have to do to get a parking reduction. Mm-hmm. And that's to create a very strong connection to the street for pedestrians and make so since you're not moving the building to the front, one of the things I'm troubled with is standard A. that the proposed alternative achieves the intent of the subject design standard to the same or better degree. So I'm looking at your site design, and I'm looking for a strong pedestrian connection to your building and to your plaza. And to be real honest, a 6-foot asphalt, bike or trail is not the strong pedestrian connection I would like to see as an equal.
Okay.
I would like to see something wider. I would like to see something with more landscaping. I would like to see some pedestrian scale lighting. I would prefer your building shifted to the west so it connects to the trail. I think you may have an issue with the fire department to do that. I'm looking for colored concrete to connect that trail. I'm looking for satisfaction of item A, and I'm not finding it at this point.
Okay, we have to address that a little bit. We do have a walkway coming down the east side of the site and the west side of the site. And when you cross over onto the walkway plaza that runs the full length of the front of the building, the south side of the building, and even around to the back of the building, I think that we could very easily change the materials that are being used and or pedestrian lighting or both to accommodate that desire, that there's a very strong leading you to that point and over to that front walkway so that you're not in the parking lot at all.
I don't want it through the parking lot. I like it on the edge, but I'm just not feeling it at this point, I guess is my point.
And if the issue is the strength of that pedestrian connection and you don't believe it's adequate, we can fix that and make sure that that's a resolution that we work out with the staff or come back to the Urban Design Commission if necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Tybor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think just wanted to kind of point out and make a statement really that watching Tudor Center develop over the last 30 plus years there's not much really left to work with, and so I think you've really got some major constraints for the building and the design that you need to for your client based on what you have left to work with. I think I get your intention of trying to put the parking lot, put the building closer to the park versus the parking lot closer to the park. My building parking lot is right next to a park, and I park as close to the building as I can because of the security issues there. So I get that. I think from a park user perspective, a well-designed building would be much more appealing to look at than a 3-acre gravel pad that's out there now. So those are just some statements I had. I think I share Commissioner Sawhill's concerns with we have standards that need to be met, and that's what we're really looking at today. And I was pleased to hear that you'd be willing to come back with some redesign attempt to help address those concerns that we'd have.
Sure, absolutely, either on a consent agenda so we can get back relatively quickly or to resolve it with staff. We would not have a problem beefing up and kind of focusing on those pedestrian connections, both sides, including pedestrian lighting that's appropriate, as well as Mr. Winchester indicated, looking at and beefing up the landscaping component in the middle of the parking lot. So,
thank you.
Commissioner Sullivan.
Just the first question. How wide is the buffer between the parking and the building and the street in the west side? How wide is that buffer?
I didn't totally catch it. The location of the buffer?
There's a buffer between the parking lot in the west side building, in the adjacent property, west property? Yes, there's a buffer between that parking and the street. How wide is that buffer? between not the trail, between the parking and the street. They have a huge buffer. How wide it is, that buffer? But the buildings to the west. Yeah, Tanya's got it. How deep it is between, yeah.
It's 15 feet. It's
More.
no, it's on this sheet right here.
50 or 60?
50 or 60 feet.
Yeah.
And that's what I was trying to look when we start, and it coincides with Jim's comments. We have a 50-foot buffer, and then we're very abruptly changing to a 12-foot, 6-foot walkway, and that's where I see that there's a problem in the street.
What I'd like to be able to tell you is that from that driveway west is where the 180-unit residential is going, and directly adjacent to where you're asking the question about next to CDC, because CDC building was split off as a separate tract. That's going to be a multi-story parking structure that's out there right now. They have the foundations in. The steel rebar is up to about the second level. So when you look at this aerial photo, if you go out in the field right now, you're going to see that it's looking very different. That site will basically be covered.
And what's the planning for the buffer? Have you taken a look for the new buffer between the parking structure and the street?
Well, I think it's probably the minimal that the code accommodated is probably 10 feet for parking lot perimeter or perimeter parking or perimeter landscaping for the project. It's a very tight site to get the access into the site in that. And then there'll be a sky bridge coming directly from the hospital to the kind of interface between the residential and the parking garage.
So even if you would do more buffer, it wouldn't be, I mean, I'm just trying to understand what's going to happen in the future. And yes, I guess with that parking lot,
The urban, the urban fabric
do.
is quickly changing out here. Let me just tell you that.
Yeah, no,
So.
Thank you.
Have any additional questions? Commissioner Winchester?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess that was the question that I had earlier, was the areas leading up to this as you come in from Tudor Road on the right side and on the left, if you look at the aerial photograph, is the more normal buffer, and it's 10, 12, some number 10, 12 foot
Yeah,
wide.
it's
That
probably in the-
50-foot buffer, and I've been out there, that's on the property adjacent no longer exists. I mean, they're building way closer to the street, which is a normal 10-foot, 12-foot buffer out there. And looks to be, you're providing about that, are you not? On
Yes,
your-
we are. Mhm.
So you're providing the standard 10,
Yeah,
12-foot buffer
correct.
zone with your landscaping on it back from the street. Okay, I just
Correct.
wanted to clarify, because I was out there too, and I didn't see that anymore. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone from the public like to come forward and testify? Nope. Okay. I don't think we have anybody who wants to come forward. So you have 2 minutes for rebuttal.
Again, Tim Potter in rebuttal, and I'll try and do it in less than 2 minutes. I did hand out at the very beginning, before the hearing started, a letter statement from Bobby, who is the kind of manager of the Family Wellness Warriors initiative. it gives you a little bit of an idea of who the people are and how important that natural setting is to their operation. It's what they currently have now in the neighborhood, and it's what they're pursuing at this location. The other item, which I think is even more important that we handed out, is our reflection of why we think all of these items have been met and substantially met and justify the approval by the commission tonight with conditions, which we are very agreeable to go back to the drawing board and beef up and incentivize the look and the functionality of the pedestrian walkways to the building on both sides, as well as re-examine the landscaping in the interior and beef that up to some extent as well. So with that, I can simply request that you understand the strong relationship with this specific piece of property and this use, and that you do not ignore how important the natural setting is adjacent to this property to the uses proposed in this building, and consider that from an overall standpoint with the public realm, I do not believe that we are purging more by having the parking next to the street than we are gaining by having the well-designed, well-built building adjacent to the park as a non-threatening, watchful edge to the park itself. I know that I would certainly feel more secure riding or walking past a building that I know won't jump out and mug me than a parking lot that's relatively controlled, but not totally controlled, where other things could happen. So, thank you.
And there can be one more round of questions before Commissioner Winchester.
I had one other question. You meant we've talked about pedestrian access and we've talked about landscaping. You mentioned the idea that the future of pedestrian connections in, by ANMC and South Central Foundation. Does it include above grade walkways? Is it from parking garages and such, or is that something that's
within that piece of property to the east of the hospital at this time?
Okay.
There will be a drive and pedestrian corridor running north-south, basically from the primary care and the parking structure that's out next to Tudor, going all the way to Tudor Center Drive.
Okay.
And that's going to be required as part of a vacation of the road that's inboard from Tudor to accommodate additional development. So that'll actually become a dead end. Mm-hmm. This new north-south road will be put in with a strong pedestrian connection, parking structure, so we'll have above grade, at grade, possibly even below grade access to the hospital facility itself.
So as a follow-up to that, could you address how that connection, pedestrian connection, might connect to the pedestrian connection we've discussed, Mr. Sawhill, et cetera, from both sides?
Sure. I mean, I can drag this a little ways. The strong connection will actually, can you pull that one over? Yeah, just put it right there, it's fine. As you see on this area, there'll be a building expansion out here with a parking structure, and the route that will occur will probably be right about here, and then you'll be able to get across over to this trail connection and to the Chester Creek Trail connection. So it's very proximate. And that's been a very strong thing in the master plan for the entire campus, is to have strong north-south and strong east-west connections to trails.
So just, again, following that line, would you be adverse to having some condition that would at least address Mr. Sawhill's concerns about the pedestrian connection on both sides of the property to the front, and that being connected to other pedestrian systems?
It will, by virtue of just being upgraded to get out to the walkway system on Tudor Center Drive, then you can go kind of east and south, or you can go west. And when you go further west, then there are crossings and crosswalks on Tudor Center Drive that will be there. When you go further west, you'll be able to get to the vertical element and go through the skywalk that goes over to the backside of the hospital. Okay. So there, once you get on to the sidewalks that are adjacent to the road, you have full access, and there'll be a couple of new protected, even signed with flashing lights, crossings north-south of Tudor Center Drive. So it will be a very porous, walkable area.
So the flashing lights, and so those will be pretty close to where these new walkway will be coming to this building then?
Yes, and there'll probably be 2 of those crossings across the street, because we're actually looking, and if you go out in the next few days, you'll go down Tudor Center Drive and see that there are orange cones out in the road, and that's a test pattern because we're proposing to actually shrink that road from 4 lanes to actually 3. It'd be 1 each way with a larger median, adding more green space, so that when pedestrians go across, they're crossing 1 lane that's going 1 way, and it's a much safer situation. Then they can get to a storage area in the middle that's a much bigger landing, be safe, and then cross the traffic that's going 1 direction in the next lane. So those are part of the proposed improvements that are ongoing.
Thank you. I think it's really helps.
Commissioner Sullivan?
Can I make a question to the staff? I'm just looking at, as soon as the parking structure in the west side came into the discussion, I was really worried about like the street and the fill and the big buffer, but now we have a big parking structure very close to the road, and I don't see what's going to be the impact of just parking in front of the street when we have a big parking garage. What's the rules for that parking garage, for a parking garage when it's new Title 21? You know, because you cannot put parking, but then you could potentially put a parking garage?
Through the chair, Commissioner Sullivan, the issue at hand is that this property has requested a parking reduction. So as Commissioner Sawhill stated, when a parking reduction is requested, you're making the assumption, the knowledge that you're going to have people coming to the property not using a vehicle. And so the idea of creating that strong pedestrian connection is important, and that led to that standard. The property to the west with the parking garage did not request a parking reduction, and thus their parking garage meets their normal front yard setback.
Yeah, but I feel that we're trying to look as the whole context of the street and the fill. And I feel that with the parking structure, anything that we do next door, it's kind of not going to impact the street. It's just an observation. I was just wondering what happens when with the new Title 21, I mean, that's my question. When you put a parking structure, can you put it against the street?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Do we have any additional questions for the petitioner or for the petitioner? Commissioner Sawhill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Potter, I'd like to try out an additional condition of approval and get your reaction to it, see if you have any problem with it or would request some tweaks to it before we look on this. And what I'm looking to do is add an additional condition number 4, which is to bring an updated site plan back to the board under the consent agenda that provides for enhanced pedestrian connections to Tudor Center Drive. The enhancement should consider or include a 10-foot pedestrian trail from Tudor Center Drive to the building, provide pedestrian scale lighting, provide enhanced connection from the trail to the building entrance plaza.
Do you have a problem with that?
Hi, I'm Deanna Navsker, DEANNA, N as in Nancy, A, F as in Frank, Z as in zebra, GER. Currently, as designed, the widest that we can get the sidewalk, the pedestrian connectivity with the trail, and include landscaping is 6 and 8 feet. So we would either be going onto adjacent property or shifting the building, which I don't think is necessarily a problem. We can certainly look at that and see how it affects everything else on the site. We do have an extra deep planting bed on the east side of the site, so we could potentially move that drive access over. The only thing I can think of off the top of my head is that we may lose an additional 3 stalls by widening that trail. So we have the parking that runs along this way. So we would lose potentially those 3 stalls on that end. If that's not an issue, to lose an additional 3 stalls to increase the pedestrian activity or the pedestrian connectivity, we wouldn't have an issue with that. We had looked at that in the beginning, but figured the additional parking was more desirable. And then I guess, am I allowed to say anything else?
No.
No? Okay.
We're answering questions. Mr. Sahil, to add to that, could we avoid, I think we get the intent of having a much stronger walkable connection. And rather than like the danger of saying 50%, can we not say 10 feet and let us go back to the drawing board, come up with what we think is a workable and responsive answer and design solution to your request? I think we get what you're saying and what the rest of the commission has said. And it may be 8 feet, might be 8.5 feet, might be 9 feet. 10 feet might be problematic, and I just don't know yet, so I don't want to commit to the 10 feet. But we can certainly commit to coming back with a plan that I believe will meet your desired vision for enhanced pedestrian connection from Tudor Center Drive to the front of the building, and do it in a way that is a very strong message that there will be clearly a very easy walkable surface. Everybody knows it's there, it's safe, and draws you directly to the building. So with that caveat, I have no problem with that condition.
I appreciate that feedback. Thank you, Mr. Potter.
Erica?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to speak briefly about the process. Under the new code, we don't really have a 2-step process, as I think we've discussed earlier. And thus, if you wish to see this again, the appropriate method would be to postpone and request the petitioner return when they have provided the things that you want them to provide, rather than adding it as a condition and voting on the case, because then we would be writing a resolution for your action on this case, which would then still be coming back to you, and it kind of muddles the whole thing. So the appropriate method to, should you choose to follow Commissioner Sawhill's suggestions, would be to postpone to perhaps a date certain if the petitioner, likes that, and ask them to return with certain issues addressed. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have, Commissioner Condon?
Yes. If indeed this case is postponed and you come back with some revisions, maybe shifting the building and alterations to the walkway, I would also like to recommend some kind of stronger connection between your private building and the public park, public trail next to your building. I mean, I understand the benefits of your building to the clients. That's obvious. But I also feel like it would be appropriate for you to supply some kind of amenity to the public that uses that heavily uses that public zone right in front of your building. So if you can put some effort into thinking about strategies for engaging the public with your building, I think it would benefit, it would be in the public's best interest.
In response to that, I think what we would have to do is, depending on the level of that connection, review that with the Parks and Rec Department. My judgment tells me, and my experience tells me, that what will likely occur is that since there is a trail junction at the northwest corner of this property between the Chester Creek Trail and the trail that South Central Foundation was required to build as part of an earlier project that goes from the trail up to Tudor Center Drive, that we would now be enhancing, that at that, typically what happens is that there's either an informational directional unit that's put in and or benches that are put at that crossroads. And I think we'd be more than willing to consider and work with Parks and Rec to look at what they believe is appropriate for that area. If it's a couple of benches that have been done at a couple of other locations in the park, that may be a great solution for that intersection. So, sure. I had a response to part of what Ms. McConnell said, and I'm just going to step out there a little bit. You've heard what the sense of the staff is, and they're very concerned about the pedestrian accessibility and the connectivity. And to avoid a situation where Mr. Sawhill and maybe another one or two of you go fishing next month and you're not here, can I ask the question that, do you trust the staff that if you give them adequate direction, as I believe you've given us tonight, can this be approved with that condition to resolve with staff those improvements? You know, typically I would not do that, but I think that they will be looking out for the interests that have been expressed by the commission tonight, just because of the position that they've taken on this case. So that would avoid the situation of risking a delay to come back and have members that aren't here, that are here, not be here, and vice versa with Mr. Leonetti might be back at that time, but unless he listens to the tape, he can't participate. So if you're comfortable with that, fine. If not, we'll come back.
Commissioner Winchester, do you have more?
I just had a comment, Mr. Condon's, and the comment about connection. One of the things that I noticed is that you did at least some preliminary sketches of the front and the east end of the building, and what could be done is potentially more another sketch or some idea of how the connection in the back and this courtyard and how that sort of relationship, addressing how that connects with the park, along with obviously this park connection, trail connection issue, would be really great to see that, so we could sort of get a better idea that situation, or that would be one way to do it. As far as addressing the other situation, I personally would be willing to let staff, I think, address these issues with you. I think we've made some very strong statements about what we want, and we could put these conditions in there that they be addressed. Certainly, if that wasn't something you felt was worked out, certainly we would be willing to hear it again or look at the situation. I don't know, that's not really a procedure that we're allowed to do. Once we give it to staff, we're done. That's my sense of that.
All right. Do we have any additional questions for the petitioner? Anything further from staff? Okay. And this matter now rests with the commission. This closes the public hearing. All right. We have a motion to approve from Commissioner Sawhill. We have a second from Commissioner Ream. Commissioner Sajo, would you like to state your motion?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In case 2014-0089, request for a variance in the RO-SL district to allow parking facility to compromise more than 50% of the area in front of the street property line and the street-facing building elevation be approved, subject to staff's conditions 1 through 3 on page 10, and an additional condition number 4. I now get to reword to state, resolve with staff providing an enhanced pedestrian connection from Tudor Center Drive to the front of the building, which will include or consider a wider pedestrian trail, pedestrian scale lighting, and enhanced connection from the trail to the building entrance. Hope I got that okay. And if I can speak to my motion, I intend to support the motion. This is a difficult case for me. Variances always are because the standards are so high. The initial standard that I was struggling with is the first standard, Standard A, and that the proposed alternative achieves the intent of the subject design standard for the same or better degree than the subject standard. And again, maybe you don't agree with some of the things we're trying to accomplish with Title 21, but we are trying to make stronger pedestrian connections from buildings to the adjoining street. And if you want a parking reduction, you got to create that strong connection, and you got to move your buildings to the front, to the street. This is a unique site in that it is adjacent to a large park with some amenities that are important to the structure that's being built at this location. I think with the additional condition to create that strong connection, and I'm going to trust staff to work with the petitioner to accomplish all our dreams and goals, that I think that the standard A, or the first standard, has been met. Where's my other cheat sheet? The second standard is the proposed alternative achieves the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan to the same or better degree than the subject standard. And I would agree with the summary that the applicant has provided as part of my findings, that the proposed alternative will achieve the following policies of the comprehensive plan. I believe it'll achieve policy 21, policy 30, and policy 49. Standard C, the proposed alternative results in benefits to the community that are equal to or better than compliance with the subject standards. And again, I find that this standard has been met. It provides setting the building back does provide a more private and safe facility for the users and creates that connection to the park, and I believe that's appropriate at this location. And it provides a good trail safety by creating action and space next to the trail. I find that D, variance if granted will not adversely affect the use of adjacent property as permitted under the code. I find that this standard has been met. I believe this does fit with the area and is not adversely affecting the adjoining properties. And then standard E, the variance if granted does not change the character of the zoning district where the property is located and is in keeping with the intent of the code. I believe this standard has been met, and I believe staff also found that it was met. And then standard F, persons with disability are provided with access as required by the Americans with Disability Act. Again, we have an ADA compliant access, and so I find that that standard has been met. And then G, the variance, if granted, does not adversely affect the health, safety, and welfare of the people and municipality of Anchorage, and I find that that standard has been met. We will have a new strong pedestrian connection. The existing connection that connects Tudor Center Drive to the park will be enhanced and provide benefit to the community. Based on that analysis and those findings, I will be supporting the variance.
Okay, I'm going to restate the motion. So we have case 20140089, which is the request for a variance in the RO-SL district to allow a parking facility to comprise more than 50% of the area between the street property line and the street facing the building elevation. We have a motion for approval at this time, subject to staff conditions 1 through 3 on page 10, and condition number 4. Condition number 4 states that the petitioner will need to resolve with staff to create an enhanced pedestrian connection between Tudor Center Drive and the front of the building. We would like to require a wider trail, pedestrian scale lighting, and enhance the connection of the trail to the building entrance. So are you doing discussion? That needs to happen after I restate the motion. So does that go with your motion? Have I restated it correctly? Okay. Okay. And then next what we'll do is it actually, if Commissioner Ream would care to speak to her second. That's okay.
I intend to support the motion to approve this design variance. I agree with Mr. Sawhill and his findings. And I know I've been quiet to this case for the entirety, but that's because they've pretty much stated what I felt. I do agree, and I'm just going to state that I do agree that having the building adjacent to the trail creates a safer trail system for trail users and also for people coming to the parking lot. I feel high-profile parking area, if you're coming to a parking lot, makes me feel more comfortable than going to the back of a building where there's a wooded area and possibly somebody hiding in the woods. So I don't feel that that setback is an issue in this instance. I also do believe in the therapeutic benefit to the users of this facility. And because Parks and Rec is also in support of this by statement to the staff, that's a large part of it as well. And I think you would be able to receive a zoning agreement from traffic and the director just based on the fact that traffic didn't have any objection to this either. And that's all.
Thank you. And now we'll do additional discussion. Commissioner Winchester?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Sawhill, I was interested in offering a friendly amendment or addition to your motion, and that would include item number 5, a condition that they investigate the connection to the trail behind in terms of how they might work out a more complete, because they're just kind of showing, you know, one sidewalk going to the trail, how they might integrate that. And so I guess my amendment would be to research the idea of a more complete integration to the trail behind and the north side of the building, and possibly even another trail connection on the east side to this facility, so basically investigate those two connections and how their building relates to the trail.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor from Commissioner Winchester to amend to add condition number 5 that would investigate additional opportunities for them to connect to the existing trail system.
That sounds correct, yes.
Okay. Do we have a second to his motion?
No second.
I have a question regarding staff's approval of all these issues. Do you know what you're supposed to approve here? I mean, I feel uncomfortable about delegating the responsibility of the Urban Design Commission to staff. Not that I don't trust you, it's just that I feel that it is our responsibility as the Urban Design Commission to review the changes that are made. I'm glad that the petitioner is willing to consider making changes to their proposal, but I feel a responsibility to review those changes as an urban design commissioner. So perhaps it's more of a statement that I will not support a motion. I agree that the conditions are good and that that this is moving the project along, but I will not support a motion where I have to abdicate my responsibility as an urban design commissioner to get this project to move forward.
Okay, and I think that's good additional discussion. So what we do currently still have on the floor is Commissioner Winchester's motion to amend. If we do not get a second, then that will be pulled off. Okay. Look, we have a second for that motion, for the motion to amend with condition number 5. So now we can do additional discussion for that amendment. Is that what you would like to speak about, Commissioner Tybor? Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the motion to amend is for condition number 5 for them to investigate options for connecting the existing trail system with the back of the building. Okay, have I stated that correctly? Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think you stated it when you, if you're okay with that, or do you want to speak to it again? Okay. Commissioner Tybor, did you want to add?
I actually was going to speak to the original motion, but this kind of brings up a question. Wouldn't, if this was proposed as a friendly amendment, wouldn't it be up to Commissioner Sawhill whether or not he wanted to modify his motion? Otherwise,
well, and I was thinking since it was motioned and like restated, it actually rested with the chair at that point. But I don't know.
Madam Chairman, I don't think there's any such thing as a friendly amendment. Okay. I think the motion to amend is the proper way to go.
Okay.
Okay. And when appropriate, I'd like to speak to the amendment.
Okay. Do you have anything additional? Okay, so it's Commissioner Sawhill, it's your turn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I understand the desire to make an additional connection in the back, but I will not be supporting the amendment. I think it's important for South Central Foundation to control their building and control where people enter their building, and I think the connections need to be to the main access, and that's the appropriate place for a strong connection. An additional connection out to the north I see as problematic, and if they wanted one, they would have proposed one. So for those reasons, I'm not going to support it.
Thank you. Commissioner Condon, did you have more to add, or was that I'm going through my list.
So let me understand this, that Commissioner Sawhill, you're not supporting the amendment to your, okay. All right. So in speaking to my seconding of Commissioner Winchester's proposal, then I will not be supporting the motion that has been put forward.
The motion to amend?
The motion to amend, and I cannot support a motion that is that I don't believe fully addresses the character and issue here between private development and public use. I feel that there is a disconnect between that, and my feeling is that if we're not allowed to see adjustments and review the kinds of solutions that the petitioner is proposing, then it's not a motion that I can support.
Okay. Do we have any additional discussion on the motion to amend? None? Yes, if everybody could please vote for the motion to amend at this time. Jerry can't vote. Okay, so the motion to amend fails. So now we are back to the main motion, which I'm going to restate again. So this is the case 2014-0089, the request for variance. This is going to be, we have it right now as approval, subject to staff conditions 1 through 3 on page 10 and condition number 4, as stated previously. Erica, did you have something you want to add?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question. Should this motion pass, I would like some clarification from the Commission. If you look at page 41 of your packet, you will see that the proposed pedestrian pathway on the west side of the site does actually extend past the building all the way to the north edge of the site, which I assume is a connection to the trail. And I could be wrong, but Mr. Potter's shaking his head. Mr. Sawhill just stated that he really, that wasn't his concern. So should this motion pass and the staff is delegated the authority to resolve this with the petitioner, could you please provide some direction on whether these enhancements that you are directing the petitioner to provide should go the extent of the entire west side or just to achieve the pedestrian pathway to the building, and then and getting across the drive aisle to the plaza area, and kind of ignore the area to the north of that. So I'd appreciate some clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any additional discussion on our motion?
Madam Chair, just to provide the clarification from staff, it was my intent that the enhancements be from Tudor Center Drive to basically adjacent to the entrance plaza. It was not the entire west side, just to make that connection from Tudor Center Drive to the building. It wouldn't be a bad idea for the petitioner to go a little further, but that was not my intent in my motion or what I would like to see. And I guess I have one other comment for Joel. If you don't like the motion, you can always amend it. If you would prefer this to come back, you can always offer that as an amendment, make your case, and then the body can decide whether they agree with you that they would rather have it come back to the board or not. It's a valid point. I understand the point you're making. If you feel more comfortable seeing something, that's a discussion that I think is worth having amongst the board members. And one way to accomplish that is through an amendment. I know staff prefers it doesn't happen that way, but sometimes we do what we want. Just offering that as an option for you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Do you have any additional discussion or amendments? Okay. Hearing none, then we are on to voting for the main motion. And the motion passes. right, so that closes our regular agenda. I don't think we have any appearance requests or reports. Do we have any additional commissioner comments before we close the meeting? No? Okay. Then can I get a motion to adjourn? Jerry, we got one from Jerry. I have a motion from Commissioner Winchester. Can I get a second?
Talk about
And a second from Commissioner Ream. This meeting is adjourned.